to keep the spotlight on race and racial issues for just one more segment. My apologies, gang, but it's just the way the cookie crumbled this week. Let's talk about currency and Harriet Tubman. You probably have heard now because this argument has now been going on for, gosh, at least 10 years, I want to say, 10, 11 years. But you probably heard that we just have to do something about the state of American currency. And no, don't worry. That doesn't mean that we actually have to start paying off our, what is it now, $27 trillion debt. It's not that, we have to personally start responsibly spending money, because I think that last time I looked, the private credit card debt of America, which means just the credit card debt that the common everyday mass of people owe, went over $1 trillion, I think back in 2019, 2018, just within the last few years, and that has probably continued to climb. No. We have to do something about legal tender, dollar bills to you and me, because don't you know, they're just not diverse enough. They are, in fact, full. If you have a $1 bill, a $2 bill, a $5, a $10, a $20, and a $100 bill, you're going to notice something. They're all guys, and they're all white. So obviously, something is horribly wrong, and this is a top grade A priority. Or that's at least what the ruling caste say. Back in 2000, you might remember that they kind of sort of tried to solve this problem with those gold Sacagawea dollar coins. You remember those? The gold Sacagawea dollar coins. They wanted, I think they wanted them to replace quarters, and of course it never turned out. One of the problems being that people said that they felt too much like quarters when they were just in the pocket and you were fishing around for change. It was about the same size as a quarter, and it had that rough edge like a quarter does. So I don't even think that the Mint make Sacagawea gold dollar coins anymore. And I say gold because they weren't made out of actual gold. Having a gold system, that'd be crazy. But because they were painted gold, they were made to look like gold. You could pretend like you were really out in the old west partner with one of them. And then when Barack Obama was president, there was rumblings and talk that you really needed to replace one of those dead white males on one of those paper tenders with a black woman. And the name Harriet Tubman was usually the one who was cited for the replacement. Harriet Tubman, of course, she was black. She was a woman, so you got your intersectional check marks checked off. But also because you can actually make a somewhat logical, reasonable argument that Harriet Tubman should be honored in something like that, in a way, if not exactly like that, then in a way similar to that, since this woman, she was a slave, she was born into slavery, and then she escaped. So like Frederick Douglass, she escaped from slavery through, might have used the Underground Railroad, I think, I don't know exactly on the details, but she escaped regardless, got up north, won her freedom, and then, instead of just sitting down to enjoy her laurels, she started fighting slavery by her own means. Now, Frederick Douglass, he turned to oration and writing and speaking, making the circuit, telling people exactly what slavery was about, what it was doing to people. Harriet Tubman took a more, we might say, active role in that, and I don't say that to disparage anything that Douglass did, because Douglass was a giant of a man, literally, and figuratively and metaphorically, just past basically in every way you can think of. Douglass was a giant of his time. But Harriet Tubman actually started playing the Scarlet Pimpernel before the Scarlet Pimpernel had even been written. She snuck back into the South and started smuggling slaves up north so that they could also win their freedom. It was brilliant. It was gutsy. She made, I forget how many successful trips back onto plantations, southern plantations, and then got those people back up north. I want to say that in 2018, 2019, they made a movie about her. A movie which I never got a chance to see. I heard good things about it. I think it was called Tubman or Harriet. No, it wasn't. It was called Harriot. That's the name of that movie, I think. Harriet. So, okay, and the person, so there you go. Harriet Tubman could actually be on a dollar bill, and it would not be woke propaganda. Or at least it would not be total woke propaganda, because Harriet Tubman actually did important historical things. And the person that has often been listed as the guy that Tubman would replace is Andrew Jackson, because, well, you can't get rid of George Washington. At least not quite yet. They're moving towards it. Remember, last summer, not the Washington Post, but the New York Times ran a whole op-ed about how there is no place in the public square for a slave owner like George Washington. So, before too long, they're going to replace George Washington with Barack Obama's face on the $1 bill. Don't you worry. You can't really replace Thomas Jefferson because hardly anybody uses $2 bills. Lincoln, on the 5 spot, same problem as with Washington. They're getting to erasing him, but you can't quite do it yet. Alexander Hamilton, well, he just had a popular musical based on his life. So people might squawk at that. Plus, he was the first Secretary of the Treasury. That kind of looks weird, but Andrew Jackson is a prime target, not only because he is not a founding father, nor is he the great emancipator, but because everyone always points out to how abysmally he treated, for example, the Cherokee Nation. The whole Trail of Tears fiasco happened under him, and in fact, by his direct orders, where the Jackson administration ordered the Cherokee to leave their lands in the South, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And the Cherokee Nation actually took their case all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled in the Cherokee Nation's favor, saying, no, the peace treaties that it has with the United States government are legal and binding. The government has absolutely no right to move them from their lands. To which Jackson famously responded, "I see that the court has rendered its decision. Now let's see it enforce it." And he still moved all the Cherokee off to Oklahoma, and a lot of them died on what, of course, became known as the Trail of Tears. This, of course, has painted Jackson as nothing more than a horribly racist, evil, proto-Nazi monster, even though the historical story is a bit more complicated than that, as it always is. Dr. Bradley Burzer, who is the history chair at Hillsdale College, a few years ago wrote a biography about Andrew Jackson where he kind of he takes another look, a refreshing look at Andrew Jackson, where he doesn't, it's not a hagiography, it's not a whitewashing, but he does punch back against a lot of the common assumptions that most everyday people have about Jackson. For example, saying absolutely what he did to the Cherokee was horrendous, but we shouldn't take from that conclusion that he was a racist who just hated Indians because they were Indians, because other tribes of Indians he was perfectly all right with. In fact, he considered himself their friend, and they, for their part, these other Indian tribes, considered him, their friend. I'm getting all of my pronouns mixed up. What happens when you start reading about the transgender ideology. My apologies. So, there you have it. Harriet Tubman has been set to replace... Harriet Tubman, I should say, has been rumored to be on the verge of replacing Andrew Jackson on the $20 bill for some time now. And the Biden administration actually just finally out now came out and said, yes, we're going to put Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill. So save those $20 bills with Andrew Jackson's face on it, gang, because one of these days they're going to be antique pieces. Mark my words. Well, now, lo and behold, after this announcement by the Biden administration, we have a piece from Time magazine by Brittany Cooper, a professor at Rutgers University, surprise, surprise, and the author of Elegant Rage, a black feminist discovers her superpower. So you already know what sort of article it's going to be. But Brittany Cooper has had an article published in Time magazine. Headline, putting Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill is not a sign of progress. It's a sign of disrespect. And if you think that that headline just made your head spin 180 degrees, let me read to you the first 3 paragraphs of this story. The Biden administration announced its plan to return to an Obama-era initiative to put Harriet Tubman's face on the U.S. $20 bill. Her image would replace Andrew Jackson, the notoriously racist president known both for owning hundreds of slaves and for his brutal, genocidal policy of Indian removal. Based on current designs, a statue of Jackson would remain on the back of the bill, while Harriet Tubman would grace the front. Many Americans across the racial spectrum are excited about this tribute. They view it as progress, as a necessary and long overdue disruption of the American founding fathers' narrative. I do not. I know in a country that worships at the altar of capitalism, an economic system made possible by the free black labor procured through the transatlantic slave trade, a black woman's face on our currency seems like the highest honor we could bestow. But what a stunning failure of imagination. Putting Tubman on legal tender when slaves in the U.S. were treated as fungible commodities is a supreme form of disrespect. The imagery of her face changing hands as people exchange cash for goods and services evokes for me discomforting scenes of enslaved persons being handed over as payment for white debt or for anything white slaveholders wanted. America certainly owes a debt to black people, but this is not the way to repay it. On the heels of Kamala Harris's historic ascension to the vice presidency, questions about the politics of representation figure heavily in our political discussions and calculations. I believe that representation matters, that it matters for a woman with liberal values to be president someday, that black people and people of color should be in positions of leadership and decision-making in our government. But all forms of representation are not equal, and the desire to put a black woman's face in our currency represents a narrative of diversity and inclusion that is deeply ahistorical. It is the ignominious relationship of black bodies to capital and currency that is the cause today of our most violent battles in this country. So in other words, because black people were once bought and sold in the United States, putting a black woman's face on a dollar bill, basically giving her the same honor as has been bestowed on our founding fathers, Washington, Jefferson, Hamilton, Franklin, the great emancipator, Abraham Lincoln, because again, he wasn't a founding father. That is a supreme form of disrespect. I mean, it's almost brilliant, gang, what's happening here, because several things are happening here. And this piece, I mean, it's a gold mine almost. I mean, I could literally make an hour-long video just about this piece, and probably I could fill in half an hour just poking out all the things that I read in just those 3 paragraphs. I'm not going to do that now because I'm not going to submit you to that sort of torture. But what is happening here is a classic example of doublethink. Orwell's idea of doublethink. The holding of 2 contradictory positions as true at the exact same time. We have been told, Cooper says it right here, that representation is important. Representation is vital. But not that kind of representation, because that sort of representation, putting her face on a dollar bill, would be a supreme act of disrespect. Because, of course, you know, capitalism only succeeded because of slavery. That is actually part of the 1619 Project gobbledygook, which shows you how far that has been disseminated, digested, and is now being regurgitated upon the population. This doublethink is designed for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to keep you in a constant state of tension. Let me show you how this works, gang. On the one hand, they say that representation is vitally important. In fact, we need more black people in government. We need more black teachers. We need more black doctors. We need more black nurses. We need more black lawyers. We need more Hollywood and entertainment projects where the leads are black, etc., 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 etc. We need more black people in orchestras, etc., 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 etc. Not only so that other black people will be able to finally realize that the sky's the limit, even though they should know that already, because, I mean, we've just had, the first black presidency. We've had the first black Supreme Court justice. We've had so many firsts. And yet if people still don't know that they can accomplish so much in this country, is a supreme lie. And it's to cover up for the fact that the black community has been decimated by progressives and their policies and their ideologies. But that's another discussion. So on the one hand, you have this idea that representation is not only nice, not only good, not only necessary, but vital. Vital for survival. Vital even for, quote-unquote, moving forward. A favorite phrase of the left. You have that on one hand. On the other hand, however, now all of a sudden, they throw in a joker. They throw in a wild card. This sort of certain forms of representation are not just, well, not as good as other forms of representation. They are actively disrespectful, which means that it is actually a microaggression to even suggest that Harriet Tubman, for example here, be put on a $20 bill. And if you're confused, well, that just shows your white privilege, because obviously you didn't know that capitalism only succeeded because of slaves brought over by the transatlantic slave trade, which is bogus in and of itself. The origins of capitalism started in the late Middle Ages and the early Renaissance, before the transatlantic slave trade had even started, FYI. But then that means, since you're ignorant, you don't even know all the things that black people have been forced to do so that you could live in whatever comfort you have, which then shows your white privilege, your white comfort, your white supremacy, etc., etc., etc. So the very fact of trying to give these ideologues what they wanted, representation, comes back to bite you on the heel and shows you that you're just a racist anyhow. And that, of course, creates the tension in your mind, because you are now locked between the battle of wanting to create representation, again, to prove that you're an ally, that you're not a racist, and then the terror that in actually doing that, you are going to be reinforcing that you are a racist, because you will be exposing to the world your white privilege, quote unquote, and your white supremacy, quote unquote. That is what's happening here, because this entire piece is bogus, gang. Putting Harriet Tubman on the same footing as George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Alexander Hamilton would be a huge honor. The only other person that I can think of, the only other black person that I can think of who has been put on par with anyone like that would be Frederick Douglass, who was a contemporary of Abraham Lincoln. This would be a huge deal. But, you see, this is what the left does. It doesn't go for the easy victory. It would be very, very easy just to boot Jackson off the 20 and replace him with Harriet Tubman. But they don't want the easy victories. They want the psychological warfare. That's what this is about. This isn't about Harriet Tubman. This isn't about representation. This is about controlling your mind through doublethink. Remember that. Don't forget that. That is story number 2.